Before samurai ruled Japan, political power belonged primarily to emperors, aristocrats, and powerful court families. But far beyond the imperial court, Japan was changing, and local landowners needed armed men to protect their wealth. These provincial warriors were not yet the legendary samurai of later centuries, but their influence was growing. Powerful families began building private military networks that answered to commanders rather than distant officials. Two families would eventually dominate this transformation, the Taira and the Minamoto. Their rivalry would pull the imperial court into violent struggles for control of Japan. And eventually, one warrior would realize that controlling Japan required something more than winning battles. He would need a government built around the warriors themselves. That transformation began during one of Japan's most devastating civil wars. This is the story of how the samurai rose from provincial warriors to rulers of Japan.
Part 1. The First Samurai.
During the Heian period, Kyoto was the political and cultural center of Japan. But the imperial government struggled to directly control distant provinces. Large estates grew outside direct government administration, creating new centers of local power. Those estates needed men who could fight, patrol roads, enforce authority, and defend property. Warrior families gradually turned military service into a hereditary profession. Among the most important were the Minamoto, also known as the Genji. Their greatest rivals were the Taira, or Heike, another powerful warrior family. By the 12th century, both families possessed influence far beyond the battlefield. They were becoming political powers capable of deciding who controlled the imperial court. In 1156, the Hogan Rebellion revealed just how deeply warriors had entered imperial politics. Only a few years later, another conflict pushed the rivalry even further. The Taira emerged victorious, while the young Minamoto leader Yoritomo was sent into exile. For years, Yoritomo waited in the eastern provinces, far from the imperial capital. Then, in 1180, the balance of power suddenly shifted. The Genpei War had begun.
Part 2. The Genpei War.
For 5 brutal years, the Minamoto and Taira fought for control of Japan. The war was fought across mountains, rivers, fortified towns, and coastal waters. Minamoto commanders increasingly relied on disciplined cavalry and powerful mounted archers. One of the war's most famous commanders was Yoritomo's half-brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Yoshitsune became famous for bold tactics and daring attacks against the Taira. At the Battle of Ichi no Tani, Minamoto forces attacked from terrain the enemy considered nearly impossible. The Taira were driven back toward the sea. But the final confrontation would come at the narrow waters of Dan no Ura. On April 25, 1185, the two sides met in a decisive naval battle. Minamoto eventually gained the advantage as the Taira fleet collapsed. The Taira dynasty was destroyed, and the Minamoto stood victorious. Yoritomo now possessed something no warrior leader before him had achieved. He had an organized military network stretching across much of Japan. And from Kamakura, Yoritomo began building a government controlled by warriors. The age of the samurai had truly begun.
Part 3. The Kamakura Shogunate.
Yoritomo established the Kamakura Shogunate, creating a military government alongside the imperial court. The emperor remained in Kyoto, but military power increasingly rested in Kamakura. Samurai leaders became provincial administrators, landholders, and military commanders. Their loyalty was increasingly tied to personal relationships, service, land, and military obligation. This created a political system very different from the old aristocratic order. But the new government soon faced its greatest external challenge. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire turned its attention toward Japan. In 1274, an enormous invasion fleet attacked Kyushu. The Japanese warriors encountered unfamiliar tactics, formations, weapons, and explosive projectiles. Yet the invasion force eventually withdrew, leaving Japan battered but independent. 7 years later, the Mongols returned with an even larger invasion. Japan survived again, aided by fierce resistance and catastrophic storms. The invasions became part of Japan's historical memory, but victory came at a price. The government struggled to reward warriors because there was little conquered land to distribute. Over time, the Kamakura system weakened from within.
Part 4. The Ashikaga and Sengoku Era.
In 1333, the Kamakura Shogunate collapsed. A new warrior government soon emerged under Ashikaga Takauji. The Ashikaga Shogunate ruled from Kyoto during what became known as the Muromachi period. But unlike Kamakura, the Ashikaga rulers depended heavily on powerful regional warlords. Those warlords became increasingly independent. Then, in 1467, a succession dispute exploded into the devastating Onin War. The conflict destroyed much of Kyoto and shattered central authority. Across Japan, local warlords realized they could fight for power without waiting for Kyoto. Japan entered the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Castles became centers of military power, while armies grew larger and more organized. Then, a new weapon transformed Japanese warfare. Portuguese traders introduced firearms to Japan in the 16th century. Japanese armies quickly adapted them, creating new possibilities on the battlefield. And among the many warlords fighting for supremacy, one man began changing the balance. His name was Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga defeated rivals with a combination of military force, political strategy, and relentless ambition. At Nagashino in 1575, his forces famously used coordinated matchlock volleys against cavalry. Nobunaga came closer than almost anyone before him to reunifying Japan. But in 1582, his ambitions ended at the Honnoji Temple. Nobunaga died, but the struggle to unify Japan continued.
Part 5. Hideyoshi and Ieyasu.
The man who seized Nobunaga's momentum was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi rose from humble origins to become the most powerful ruler in Japan. By 1590, Hideyoshi had brought nearly all of Japan under his authority. But Hideyoshi did not create a stable succession. After his death in 1598, powerful factions once again competed for control. At the center of this struggle stood Tokugawa Ieyasu. Unlike Nobunaga's speed or Hideyoshi's ambition, Ieyasu was famous for patience. In 1600, the rival armies finally met at Sekigahara. The battle became the decisive struggle for control of Japan. Ieyasu's forces emerged victorious. 3 years later, in 1603, Ieyasu was appointed shogun. The Tokugawa Shogunate had begun. The samurai had finally achieved what generations of warriors had fought for. They had transformed from provincial guards into the ruling class of Japan. And now, Japan entered more than 2 centuries of relative peace.
Legacy.
Under Tokugawa rule, samurai were no longer constantly fighting on battlefields. Many became administrators, bureaucrats, teachers, and officials. Their swords remained symbols of status, even as their daily lives became increasingly peaceful. Yet the world outside Japan was changing rapidly. By the 19th century, foreign powers were pressuring Japan to open its ports. The Tokugawa system began to crack under political and economic pressure. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration ended the Tokugawa Shogunate. The samurai's privileged status would soon disappear with the modernization of Japan. For nearly 7 centuries, warriors had transformed the political destiny of Japan. The samurai began as provincial warriors. They ended as the ruling class of Japan, and their legacy still shapes how the world remembers Japan's warrior age.